Hi, my name is Dr. Rob C. Thompson, and these are the 5 Renaissance alchemists you should probably know. Our terms today are Renaissance, which refers to the period between the Middle Ages and the Age of Reason, roughly 1400 to 1700. We're going to stretch that a little bit today, but not too much. And Alchemists, who are people who followed a particular philosophy regarding the capacity for supernatural forces to impact material elements, most famously, although not exclusively, the transmutation of base metals into gold. Johannes Trithemius. On his way back from Heidelberg to the Mosel Valley, Johannes Trithemius was caught in a snowstorm and forced to seek shelter at the monastery of St. Martin at Sponheim. Reading this as a sign from God, Trithemius became a novice there, and at the age of 21 became the monastery's abbot. Trithemius collected a large library of texts, seeking to unify learning and piety, pagan philosophy and Christian theology, and his reputation spread throughout Europe. Trithemius was branded as a dangerous occultist in 1499 when he sent a letter to his friend Arnold Bastius at the Carmelite monastery in Ghent. The letter concerned Trithemius's ideas for transmitting messages across great distances through the mediation of angels. But no such communication would be possible with Bastius since Bastius had died. The prior at the monastery read the letter and interpreted Trithemius's theories as traffic with the devil. The prior published them to scandalize the abbot, but it only fed Trithemius's reputation as an adept. Trithemius focused his research in 2 areas, demonology and occult operations. On demonology, he wrote in response to questions put to him by the Emperor Maximilian, and started work on an encyclopedia of demons which he never completed, an encyclopedia that you also can't look for because it isn't extant. In opposition to the growing hostility toward the supernatural in Germany, he sought to align his theology with that of the Church Fathers, who existed in a world in which demons could occasionally pop by for a visit. Trithemius argued that demons did not interfere in human affairs unless they were invited. Wickedness made people vulnerable to demonic attack. He went out on an early form of paranormal investigation to visit places that were supposed to be haunted by demons. Among them was the town of Mainz, where a demon was dislodging stones from the tops of buildings and hurling them at pedestrians, and also, incidentally, sneaking into women's beds with them. Mischievous demons were a nuisance, but less likely to imperil the soul than those demons brought into contact with humans who suffered from a debased will. In this class were demons who possessed their victims and could be exorcised, and demons with whom sorcerers and witches willingly trafficked. In his letter to the deceased Bastius, Trithemius described a series of books in process on occult practice. The first concerned cryptography, or the encoding of messages. The second, the transmission of messages across great distances through non-physical means. The third, how to teach an uneducated man how to read and write in Latin in 2 hours. Wow. And the fourth, how a thought can be transferred to another person without words or gestures while in the company of others, also known as steganography. The process of steganography began with the message sender writing a prayer stamped with the seal of one of the 12 heavenly emperors and sending it to the message recipient. These 12 emperors are rulers of the 12 regions that the heavens have been divided into. The recipient then turns toward the domain of the emperor in question and uses special conjurations to call up one of his supernatural servants to bring him the intended message. The letter itself contains no information. It is the spirits who carry the information that must be conveyed between these 2 adepts. Cornelius Agrippa. Cornelius Agrippa was born in Nettesheim, and his family belonged to the middle nobility. In 1509, he visited the alchemist Johannes Trithemius, and they agreed to work together to revive the reputation of occultism and magic to the status of a divine art. Agrippa began his writing career as an anti-occultist. In 1531, he published On the Uncertainty and Vanity of the Arts and Sciences, a book in which he argued that human scholarship can never aspire to true certainty and knowledge. Agrippa's skepticism is a product of his distrust of human technique and learning to reveal the higher truths of God, and the tendency of humans to misuse their knowledge for base ends like pride and greed. The short gap in time, only 2 years, between Agrippa's skeptical text and his 3 books of occult philosophy seems to suggest that he intended for magic to be the answer to his skepticism. But the chronology is actually accidental. In fact, both his occultism and his skepticism of human learning are part of the same philosophical system of thought that praised his old master Trithemius, while at the same time smacking him upside the head, namely by questioning Trithemius's commitment to steganography, or telepathic communication using angels, that we just mentioned. He completed his 3 books of occult philosophy in 1533, just 2 years before he died. In it, Agrippa contends that humans are at work on a mystical upward motion back up from the 4 elements toward God. The fall of man was the event that separates humans from God. Before this event, we were like God, encompassing within ourselves everything in the universe as a microcosm of God's universal macrocosm. This blend of elements was infused with God's divine light, ensuring immortality. The fall, that is to say the fall of Adam and Eve, was the sexual act. Embracing the body through sexual desire and gratification caused man to fall from the luminous sphere of contemplation. Sex precipitated physical reproduction as a replacement for man's original project, which was apparently spiritual reproduction, or the generation of souls on God's behalf. But by reversing this downward trajectory through a spiritual ascent, humans could regain their ability to create souls, a project otherwise reserved for God, and this was a kind of self-deification. Agrippa was a devout Christian who viewed Christianity as the culmination of a philosophical tradition stretching back through the Hermetic texts into antiquity, and this deeply informed his philosophy. Paracelsus. Paracelsus was born in Einsiedeln, Switzerland. His father was a physician, and Paracelsus followed in his footsteps, studying medicine at the University of Ferrara and then wandering through Europe as a military surgeon and itinerant doctor. His writing career began in Salzburg in the 1520s and continued until his death in 1541. There's been some controversy over Paracelsus's involvement in the occult, with some scholars separating his occult writing off from his medical writing as questionably or falsely attributed to the good doctor, but the line of thought in both the medical and occult texts is similar enough to ascribe them to the same author, namely Paracelsus. Paracelsus was primarily a natural philosopher who wrote about medicine, but he was secondarily or tertiarily a writer on the realm of the supernatural. Paracelsus sought to reform medieval medical practice, but the faculties of the universities were not amenable to his theories, and so he developed a grand occult philosophy encompassing both normal and paranormal, religion and science, in order to overcome the obstacles to his innovations. In his analysis of disease, Paracelsus identifies 5 causes, and among them is ens spiritale, disease caused by spirits. These are psychosomatic and have hex-death qualities. Wax figures or strong feelings of animosity precipitate disease in the victim. Malevolent feelings toward others can conjure vengeful spirits who cause physical harm. Paracelsus went on to devote an entire volume to what he called the invisible diseases. An inadequate or improper faith in God can, according to the doctor, cause illness and evil feelings that inspire illness. Paracelsus was an early Reformationist, and so he rejected the cults of the saints, pilgrimage, and miracle healing in favor of a system in which faith itself was a mechanism for healing. God's power, pure and simple, without any of these intervening figures or rites, was the curative force. His Astronomia Magna encompasses all sorts of magical ideas: the transformation of bodies, the magical properties of herbs, the manufacture of magical gems, discerning voices at a distance, and interacting with the spirits, not to be confused with the souls of the dead. John Dee. John Dee was born in London in 1527 and died in 1608 or 1609 at his home in Mortlake, Surrey. He was a mathematician, an astronomer, consultant to explorers, alchemist, translator of angelic language, and amassed one of the most impressive libraries in Europe, gathering around 3,000 books and another 1,000 manuscripts. His reputation as an occultist has lasted through the centuries and is perhaps his largest claim to fame today, but it belies his effort late in life to try and distance himself from the label of conjurer. In 1564, Dee published his great alchemical text, the Monas Hieroglyphica. The book proposed a symbolic language that would explain the inner workings of creation, the material world, and a mystical plan for the ascent of the soul. In 1556, Dee spent the month of July reading 55 alchemical texts which he categorized in his library under the heading Chemici, suggesting the overlap of chemistry and alchemy during the Renaissance. Dee was particularly engaged with Paracelsian literature, having over 90 volumes devoted to Paracelsus. Elizabeth I was apparently very interested in the secrets hidden in Dee's book. Dee borrows two themes from the Emerald Tablet attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. Number 1, the Philosopher's Stone is a monad, much like the unitary world of God that formed the universe. And 2, the interdependence of the celestial and terrestrial is a fact of nature, that is to say, heaven and earth. The movement from the one to the many and back to the one in the uniting of the earth and heaven are central to the process that Dee envisions. Dee's contact with supernatural beings was mediated by scryers or mediums, the most famous of which was Edward Kelly. Dee recorded his conversations through Kelly with the spirits, taking on faith that these exchanges were genuine. Kelly was both a scryer and an assistant in Dee's alchemical operations, bringing Dee a red powder that he claimed to be the Philosopher's Stone. Kelly's angels promised a kind of alchemy not practiced since the time of Adam that would yield a medicine of God capable of healing the sickness and decay of the natural world. After being ejected from the court of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II and experimenting with wife-swapping at Kelly's instruction, Dee and Kelly parted ways. After his return to England, where Dee found his Mortlake home and library raided and left to the elements, the alchemist took up interest in exorcism and offered advice on several cases of demonic possession. As the culture increasingly turned against occultism during the Protestant Revolution, John Dee found himself in disrepute and died in relative obscurity in 1605. Isaac Newton. During the Renaissance, there was often little or no division between art and science, or science and spirituality. Medical doctors studied divinity, and painters studied engineering. Isaac Newton was perhaps the last great voice of this non-specialized school of thinker. Isaac Newton was born Christmas Day, 1642, in the Woolsthorpe Manor House near the village of Custerworth. His father, also named Isaac, died 3 months before he was born, and his mother, Hannah, remarried. He began study at Trinity College in 1661, and when the plague came to Cambridge 2 years in a row, he spent his summers and winters at home in Woolsthorpe. It is during this time that Newton was said to have had his mystical revelation with the apple, realizing that the apple was drawn to the earth with the gravitational pull that the earth exerted on the moon. Newton was the co-discoverer of calculus and served as the Lucasian professor of mathematics at Trinity. Gottfried Leibniz had discovered calculus separately and at the same time as Newton. Around 1669, Newton began experimenting with alchemy. Much of Newton's alchemical writing was lost in a laboratory fire, but we have a translation he produced of the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. Newton described gravity as a kind of matter that came down to earth and ascended again toward heaven, since otherwise the earth would swell up as it filled with gravitational matter. In this way, Newton may have seen a correlation between his theory of gravity and his pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone. The stone required a great deal of spirit, which was the unfixed aspect of the stone that ascended to heaven. This had to be congealed into the stone in order to make it function. The processes for this transition were incineration, that is to say, turning to ashes and mixing with oil extracted from the stone in the first steps, and then sublimation, or moving from a solid to a gas state instantaneously. Through these transformations, the Philosopher's Stone reached its final form. In the 1680s, Newton was working late into the night on his various chemical experiments, from which he compiled his Index Chemicus, running 879 headings and 5,000 references. These experiments included an exploration of Diana's tree, a crystallized form of silver formed by combining mercury with silver nitrate, which alchemists believed was a precursor to the Philosopher's Stone. From August 1684 until spring 1686, Newton focused almost exclusively on his Principia. Edmund Halley of Halley's Comet fame brought the problem of proving Kepler's laws of planetary orbit to Newton, and that spurred Newton to begin the project which led to his laws of motion. Principia established Newton as a great scientist. He had a nervous breakdown in 1693, perhaps as a result of mental exhaustion from his work on the Principia. He was named President of the Royal Society in 1703 and knighted by Queen Anne in 1705. He died in 1727 at the age of 84. And that's 5 Renaissance alchemists you ought to know about. My name is Dr. Rob C. Thompson. I have written and performed this episode, which is edited by Daniel Rosendale.